Good morning. I'm Dr. Raju Devde, Professor and HOD, Pharmacology, KMC Warangal. Today, the topic of discussion is cholinergic drugs. So, these cholinergic drugs are the drugs which act by interfering with the acetylcholine, and the cholinergic transmission can be divided into like the cholinergic drugs or cholinomimetic drugs. Then we have anticholinesterases or indirectly acting cholinergic drugs. Then the third aspect will be anticholinergic drugs. Okay, so we will be dividing the drugs which are affecting the parasympathetic transmission, that is the cholinergic system, can be divided into three main headings. One is the cholinergics or cholinomimetic drugs. Then we have anticholinesterases or indirectly acting cholinergic drugs. Then number three, we have this cholinergic antagonist or anticholinergic drugs. So today we will discuss about the cholinergic drugs. So before going into the cholinergic drugs, one should remember that the cholinergic transmission or the cholinergic receptors are of two types. One is the muscarinic receptors and the nicotinic receptors. And if you go for a brief recap, when you look into this cholinergic transmission, if you look at the neurotransmitter in the cholinergic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system is acetylcholine. And if you remember, it is an ester of choline. Acetylcholine is an ester of choline. And the nerves that synthesize, store, and release acetylcholine are called as the cholinergic nerves. And the sites of release of acetylcholine are the ganglion. So all the preganglionic fibers of the ANS, that is at both the sympathetic and parasympathetic ganglia, they release acetylcholine. Not only that, if you look at the postganglionic parasympathetic nerve endings, they also release acetylcholine. And with a few exceptions like the sweat glands, the sympathetic postganglionic nerve endings supplying the sweat glands also release acetylcholine. So that means to say there's an exception, that is the sympathetic postganglionic nerve endings. They release acetylcholine as the neurotransmitter. And apart from that, if you look at the skeletal muscles are supplied by the somatic nerve endings. They also release the acetylcholine as a neurotransmitter. And adrenal medulla, acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter. And in the CNS, especially the brain and the spinal cord, and if you look at the muscarinic receptors, which are more abundant in the brain, while the nicotinic receptors are more abundant in the spinal cord. Okay, with this brief introduction of the cholinergic transmission, we will like to move ahead. There's some problem here. We'd like to move ahead with this. Yeah. So as I already told you that the cholinergic nervous system or the cholinergic or parasympathetic nervous system or acetylcholine has two types of receptors. They are the muscarinic receptors and the nicotinic receptors. So when you look into this muscarinic receptors, they were named as such because they are more sensitive to muscarine than nicotine. And muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, they belong to a class of metabotropic receptors, which are, they use the G proteins as their signaling mechanisms. In such receptors, the signaling molecule, which is called as the ligand, it binds to a receptor which has 7 transmembrane regions. And in this case, the ligand is acetylcholine. And this receptor is bound to intracellular proteins. They are known as G proteins or G protein coupled receptors, which begin the information cascade within the cell. If you look at this slide, if you see the muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, it produces parasympathetic nerve effects in the heart, the smooth muscles, and the glands. And they are G protein coupled receptors, which influence the ion channels by means of G proteins. Okay, so if you look at this particular aspect, this acetylcholine, it enters into the transmembrane, which causes opening of potassium channels are opened, resulting in hyperpolarization, and which causes inhibition, especially on the cardiovascular system, which produces a slower heart rate. Now, if you look at the other hand side, this acetylcholine, which causes this enters into the through the transmembrane, and it causes a depolarization by closure of the potassium channels, resulting in excitation, which causes the smooth muscles of the digestive system and to get contracted. So it is having an excitation effect on the gastrointestinal system. It is having a inhibition effect on the cardiovascular system. Now, if you look at the other hand side, the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors, they are located especially postsynaptically on the membrane of all the autonomic ganglion and all the neuromuscular junctions and some central nervous system pathways. And these are act through the ligand-gated ionic channels, which are a part of the receptor. So these ligand-gated ionic channels. So here again, what happens is there is entry of the sodium and also acetylcholine, which causes opening up of the potassium channel, or there's a leak of the potassium, causing a depolarization, which is resulting in excitation. Okay. And this nicotinic acetylcholine receptors are present postsynaptically on the membranes of all the autonomic ganglion, all the neuromuscular junctions, and some central nervous system pathways. Okay. Now, if you look at this particular synthesis of acetylcholine, the synthesis of acetylcholine, as you know, it's synthesized from acetyl coenzyme A with combination with choline. And these choline esters are released into the cholinergic neuron by a carrier mediated transport. Okay, by a carrier mediated transport. And not only that, this reacts with the acetyl coenzyme A, and the reaction is catalyzed by an enzyme which is called as choline acetyl transferase. So this is actually the acetylcholine receptors and acetylcholinesterase or choline acetyl transferase. Okay, and yeah, and the formed acetylcholine is stored in the form of smaller oval type of vesicles in the cholinergic neuroterminal. So these are the synaptic vesicles. After formation of acetylcholine, it is stored in the form of vesicles. The smaller vesicles they are called as the synaptic vesicles. Okay, and finally, when an action potential reaches the presynaptic membrane, so when the action potential reaches the presynaptic terminal or the membrane, okay, acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft. So acetylcholine is released into the synaptic cleft, and this acetylcholine further binds with the acetylcholine receptor and activates the cholinergic receptor, that is the acetylcholine receptor, on the postsynaptic membrane, leading to depolarization of this membrane. Thus, the impulse is transmitted across the synapse, and acetylcholine released into the synaptic cleft is rapidly destroyed by the enzyme which is called as acetylcholinesterase. Once the acetylcholine is released due to depolarization or formation of an action potential or the action potential which reaches the presynaptic membrane, the acetylcholine is released in the synaptic cleft, and this in turn will activate the cholinergic receptor or acetylcholine receptor, on the postsynaptic membrane, okay, and leading to depolarization of this membrane. And this impulse is transmitted across the synapse, and later on this acetylcholine is destroyed within the synaptic cleft by an enzyme which is called as acetylcholinesterase. This is called as the true acetylcholinesterase or true cholinesterase. Okay. Then the postsynaptic membrane is repolarized. So after a destruction, the postsynaptic membrane is destroyed. So if you look at these cholinesterases, they are usually two types. Okay. So this acetylcholinesterase and we have butyryl cholinesterase. So acetylcholinesterase is also called as the true cholinesterase. Okay. And the pseudocholinesterase or butyryl cholinesterase is called as the pseudocholinesterase. Okay. Pseudocholinesterase or butyryl cholinesterase. So this true cholinesterase or acetylcholinesterase, it is present at various sites, especially in the neurons, the ganglia, and the neuromuscular junction. So please remember, true cholinesterase, which is also called as acetylcholinesterase, it is present at the neurons, the ganglion, and the neuromuscular junction. Secondly, pseudocholinesterase or butyryl cholinesterase, it is present in the plasma, the liver, and other organs. And if it hydrolyzes many other esters apart from acetylcholine. So true cholinesterase or acetylcholinesterase is going to hydrolyze only the acetylcholine, that is endogenous acetylcholine, whereas the pseudocholinesterase, which is distributed in the plasma, liver, and other organs, hydrolyzes many other esters apart from acetylcholine. So it will hydrolyze acetylcholine as well as it can hydrolyze other, or it can metabolize other esters of acetylcholine also. Okay, so that is regarding the cholinesterases. So we have true cholinesterase and pseudocholinesterase. True or acetylcholinesterase, pseudo or butyryl cholinesterase. So please remember, this is very important. Now, if you look at the various types of cholinergic receptors, so first we will discuss about the muscarinic receptors. So these muscarinic receptors are further classified into M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5. So if you look at this characteristics of these muscarinic receptors, so this M1 receptors, especially, they are called as neural receptors. M1 or neural, M2, which is cardiac, and M3, it is glandular, or they are present in glandular receptors or the smooth muscles. M4 and M5, they are not characterized. Then if you look at the main locations of this M1 receptors, please remember M1 in the central nervous system. Apart from the central nervous system, they are also present in the gastric and salivary glands. So gastric and salivary glands. So this M1 receptors are present in the gastric as well as the salivary glands. And the cellular responses which are mediated through M1 receptors are, they increase the IP3, that is inositol triphosphate and diacylglycerol pathway, resulting in depolarization, and excitation occurs with an increased conduction of potassium. Okay, then what is the functional response of these M1 receptors? They cause CNS excitation. That is the reason why it has also an important role in the memory, and also it increases the gastric secretion. If you look at the agonist at the level of M1 receptors, acetylcholine is the agonist. The non-selective agonists are carbachol, oxytrimorin, and so on and so forth. Okay, now if you look at the M2 receptors are also called as cardiac or cardiac. They are located in the heart, that is the cardiac system. Or the they are located in the cardiac or the CVS. And these M2 receptors, which are located in the heart, they are present in the atria. They are also present in the smooth muscle of the GIT, also present in the CNS, which are widely distributed. But specifically, the cardiac effects through the muscarinic receptors are mediated through M2 receptors. And the cellular responses of the muscarinic type 2 receptors are by decreasing the cyclic AMP, and they decrease the calcium conductance and they increase the potassium conductance. So by this mechanism, the functional response of M2 receptors, they cause cardiac inhibition, they cause neural inhibition, and the central muscarinic effects, especially like the tremor and hypothermia, are also mediated by the M2 receptors. Okay. Then the agonists, which are the similar as that of the agonist on M1, that is acetylcholine, carbachol, and oxytremolin. Then we look at the M3 receptors. They are mainly the glandular receptors or the present on the smooth muscles. The main locations of these M3 receptors are the exocrine glands, the gastric mucosa, the salivary glands, as well as the smooth muscles of the GIT, the eye, the blood vessels, and the endothelium. And the cellular response with M3 receptors is it causes increased stimulation of IP3, that is inositol triphosphate. It also causes increased stimulation of the calcium release, and the functional responses at the level of the gastric, they increase the gastric and salivary secretion. The GI smooth muscle contraction is also increased. There is an ocular responses like accommodation as well as vasodilation occurs, and the agonists at the level of the M3 receptors are again similar to that of the M1, that is acetylcholine, carbachol, oxytremolin, which are non-selective cholinergic drugs. Then when you look at the M4 receptors, again it is the main location again questionable. It may say that it is present in the lungs, the CNS, that is the cortex, and the striatum. And the cellular response is again similar to that of the M2 receptors, where it causes decreased cyclic AMP, resulting in inhibition, decreased calcium conductance, and increased potassium conductance. And the main functions with respect to M4 receptor stimulation is enhanced locomotion, and the agonists are again acetylcholine, carbachol, and oxytremolin. Then when you look into the M5 receptors, they are present in the CNS, very localized expression in the substantia nigra, the salivary glands, iris, or the ciliary muscle. And the cellular response is they cause increase in the IP3, resulting in stimulation. They cause increased calcium conductance, and exact function or functional response of M5 receptors is not known. And the agonists are again similar to that of acetylcholine, carbachol, and oxytremolin. So the acetylcholine, carbachol, oxytremolin, and the cholinergic drugs, they are having an agonistic activity on M1, M2, M3, M4, and M5 receptors, but with a less specificity with M4 and M5. But generally, if you look at M1, they are mainly concentrated in the cerebral cortex, the hippocampus, the various glands of the GIT, the salivary glands, etc. M2, they are mainly concentrated, especially on the cardiovascular system, the heart, especially the atria, the smooth muscle of the GIT, and the CNS. They are widely distributed M2 receptors. M3, they are glandular and they are localized in the smooth muscles of various exocrine glands, the gastric salivary glands, the smooth muscle of the GIT, the eye, the blood vessels, and the endothelium. So this is actually the characteristic features of the muscarinic receptors, their locations, the cellular responses, their functional responses, and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at the parasympathetic innervation, actually we have dealt this in the first introduction class, so I need not discuss regarding this. I'll just skip this slide. But for your understanding, the parasympathetic innervation of different organs, if you look at the cranial nerves, here there are 4 cranial nerves which are involved in the parasympathetic innervation. The cranial nerve 3. So if you look at this cranial nerve 3, through various ganglion, that is the spinopalatal ganglion, it is getting innervated to the lacrimal gland through the through the salivary ciliary ganglion, it is getting innervated into the especially the eye. So the third cranial nerve through the ciliary ganglion, it is innervating the eye, and the seventh cranial nerve, okay, through the sphenopalatine ganglion, it is innervating the lacrimal gland, and through the submandibular ganglion, it is innervating the salivary gland. Okay. Then if you look at the ninth cranial nerve, that's the glossopharyngeal nerve, through the otic ganglion, it is innervating the salivary gland. Okay, the glossopharyngeal nerve into the salivary glands. Now, if you look at the ninth cranial nerve, it is the longest cranial nerve which is having a cholinomimetic action, that is the vagus. Okay, so this is the 11th cranial nerve, sorry, the 11th cranial nerve, which is the longest cranial nerve, which is having a parasympathetic activity through the release of acetylcholine. So through various cardiac and pulmonary plexus, it is innervating the heart and the lungs. Through the celiac plexus, it is innervating the liver, the gallbladder, as well as the stomach, the pancreas. And through the hypogastric plexus, it is innervating the large intestine, the small intestine, and through the sacral part, the sacral. So this is actually the craniosacral outflow, especially in case of parasympathetic nervous system. So till now, what we have seen is the cranial outflow. But not only that, the S1, S2, S3, and S4 divisions of the sacral spinal cord through the pelvic nerves, it innervates the various organs of the body, especially the ovary, the uterus, the pelvis, the scrotum, so sorry, the penis, the scrotum, as well as the what you call the distal part of the rectum, to the kidneys and the urinary bladder. So please remember that the parasympathetic innervation to the different organs is through the craniosacral outflow. So if you look at this 11th or say the 10th cranial nerve, that is the vagus, which is giving supply to various vital organs like the heart, the lungs, the liver, the stomach, the pancreas, the spleen, the large intestine, the small intestine, the rectum, through various plexuses, that is the cardiac and pulmonary plexuses, as well as the celiac plexus and the hypogastric plexus. Whereas the sacral divisions of the parasympathetic nervous system through S2, S3, and S4, through the pelvic nerves, they get innervated to the ovaries, to the uterus, the penis, the scrotum, the urinary bladder, the kidney, and so on and so forth. So this parasympathetic innervation is a very important innervation one should know, because there are 4 cranial nerves which are involved in the cranial division: the third cranial nerve, the 7th cranial nerve, the 9th cranial nerve, and the 10th cranial nerve. Okay, so very important. Now, if you look at this muscarinic receptor agonist, which is an agent that enhances the activity of the muscarinic acetylcholine receptor. And apart from that, if you look at the classification of these cholinergic drugs, so they are classified especially according to the convenience. You can classify these cholinergic drugs or cholinomimetic drugs into directly acting cholinergic drugs, and these directly acting cholinergic drugs can be further divided into esters of choline or cholinomimetic alkaloids. This is one classification. Then we have another classification which is called as indirectly acting anticholinesterases or the cholinomimetic drugs. So indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs are also called as anticholinesterases. Okay, so these anticholinesterases are again further divided into reversible anticholinesterases and irreversible anticholinesterases. Okay, so this reversible anticholinesterases, the examples are neostigmine, physostigmine, pyridostigmine, edrophonium, ambinonium, and galantamine. So these are reversible anticholinesterases or indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs. Then we have irreversible anticholinesterases or irreversible indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs. They are the organophosphorus compounds like ecothiophyte, malathion, parathion, sumithion, diazinon, and the toxic nerve gases like sarin, soman, and tabun. Okay. Then apart from that, we have certain carbamate insecticides, which are again irreversible anticholinesterases like carbaryl, propoxyur, and aldi-carb. So they are indirectly acting irreversible cholinomimetic drugs or anticholinesterases also we can say. So why anticholinesterase? Why they are called as cholinomimetics? Cholinomimetics are the drugs which have the acetylcholine-like activity. Okay, when they stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, they release acetylcholine, and these drugs have acetylcholine-like activity. Why do we say anticholinesterases? Because acetylcholine is metabolized by true cholinesterases or choline acetyl acid or cholinesterase. Okay, this acetylcholine is metabolized or hydrolyzed by cholinesterase enzyme. So anticholinesterase means we are inhibiting the cholinesterase, so whereby indirectly we are increasing the concentration of acetylcholine, where acetylcholine will not get hydrolyzed or metabolized. That is why this is called as anticholinesterase or indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs. Now, if you look at the directly acting cholinomimetic drugs, they are esters of choline like acetylcholine, beta-choline, carbachol, and methacholine. And then we have cholinomimetic alkaloids like pilocarpine, muscarine, and aricoline. So this is a typical classification of cholinergic drugs. And the other classification which is present in the slide here is they can be directly acting parasympathomimetics or cholinomimetic drugs like acetylcholine, we have methacholine, carbachol, bethanicol, janomelin, pilocarpine, oxytrimorin. So this pilocarpine, oxytrimonin, janomelin, and all these things actually they are the cholinomimetic alkaloids. Then we have M1 receptor specific cholinomimetic drugs like oxytrimorin and janomelin. Then M3 receptor agonists like cevimelin, pilocarpine, ericolin, aceclidine. So then we have non-selective agonists. So non-selective cholinomimetic drugs are acetylcholine, carbachol, bethanicol, and methacholine. And generally, these agonists do not have specificity towards the receptors. They are non-selective. Now, indirectly, as I told you, like reversible, irreversible, or they are also called as acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, or we call indirectly acting parasympathomimetic drugs or indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs. They are acetylcholinesterase inhibitors, reversible and irreversible. Irreversible, we have physostigmine, neostigmine, pyridostigmine, edrophonium, galantamine, ambinonium, etc. Irreversible, as I told you, organophosphate compounds. We have the ecothiophyte, we have malathion, we have parathion, then we have diisopropyl fluorophosphate, and so on and so forth. And generally, these are used to increase the duration of action of acetylcholine on the receptors by preventing the metabolism of acetylcholine. So that means to say, anticholinesterase means the cholinesterase is the enzyme which is going to metabolize acetylcholine. So they prevent the metabolism of acetylcholine by inhibiting the cholinesterase, whereby there is an increased concentration of acetylcholine at the level of the receptors. So that is why they are called as indirectly acting parasympathomimetic drugs. Now, if you look at directly acting cholinesters, as I told you, we have acetylcholine, bethanicol, carbachol, and methacholine. So if you look at this receptor specificity of acetylcholine, it acts through both muscarinic as well as the nicotinic receptors, and it is hydrolyzed by the cholinesterase enzyme. And the routes of administration of acetylcholine, generally, acetylcholine is not used for therapeutics because it does not have much of therapeutic uses in the humans because it is rapidly hydrolyzed. That is, say, in the millionth of the second, it is hydrolyzed by acetylcholinesterase. But still, it has some uh, role to play as an intraocular injection, especially intraocular route of administration, especially to produce what you call like the meiosis during ophthalmic surgery. And not only that, if you look at the beta nicol, it is acting through the muscarinic receptor and it is not hydrolyzed by the cholinesterase. And it can be used orally or subcutaneously, especially in post-operative or postpartum urinary retention. So it is used for the treatment of postpartum or post-operative urinary retention, that is the beta-nicol, either orally or it can be given subcutaneously. When you talk about carbachol, it is having a muscarinic and nicotinic receptor specificity, and it is not metabolized by acetylcholinesterase or cholinesterase, whereas this carbachol also has certain role to play in treating diseases like glaucoma, especially which is used for topical use in the eye, and intraocular, especially to produce meiosis during ophthalmic surgery. Now, as I told you, this acetylcholine, as it is rapidly hydrolyzed as a millionth of seconds, it is hydrolyzed by cholinesterase. So the therapeutic uses are very minimal. And if you look at the effects and indications of acetylcholine, as I told you, intraocular use during cataract surgery, where it produces meiosis, and in diagnosis or in diagnostic angiography, it is injected directly into the coronary artery to produce vasodilatation through M3 receptors, but this is also a very rare phenomenon. Now going to the ocular effects of generally, when you look at this particular slide, if you see the lens is here, then we have, I'm sorry, the lens. Then we have this iris. This is the iris lens, and this is the ciliary muscle, and this is suspensor ligament. Okay, this is a normal eye where you can see the pupil is actually not fully dilated, nor it is fully constricted. But once you instill a drug which is called as pilocarpine, which is a muscarinic receptor agonist, that means to say it has a cholinomimetic action, muscarinic receptor agonist, which causes the pupillary constriction resulting in meiosis. Hence, pilocarpine is used in the treatment of glaucoma. Okay, because it causes meiosis, and then what happens in glaucoma, there is a increased intraocular tension. So if I use atropine in the treatment of glaucoma, it will worsen the glaucoma, because when I instill atropine in the eye intraocularly, which is a muscarinic receptor antagonist, which is causes the pupillary dilatation, which is actually a contraindication in glaucoma, because it causes crowding at the level of the sclerocorneal junction, resulting in increased intraocular tension. But this pilocarpine and atropine can be used, especially alternatively, or pilocarpine and atropine can be used alternatively, especially to release the adhesions between the what you call like the iris and the lens. Okay, that is the thing you have to remember. Then if you look at the directly acting plant alkaloids, they are called as cholinomimetic alkaloids, like muscarine. We have nicotine and pilocarpine. So receptor specificity of muscarine is the muscarinic receptors. They are not hydrolyzed by cholinesterases, and they do not have any route of administration, neither they have any clinical role to play. Which one? Muscarine. So muscarine is having a similar receptor specificity of muscarinic receptors, but it does not have any role to play in the hydrolysis, neither has any clinical effects. Then if you look at the nicotine, it is acting through nicotinic receptors. It is also not hydrolyzed or by the cholinesterases. It can be used orally or transdermally, especially in the smoking cessation programs. For de-addiction, especially in smoking cessation programs, nicotine is used as a transdermal patch. When you look at pilocarpine, it has greater affinity to the muscarinic receptors than to the nicotinic receptors. This pilocarpine is also not hydrolyzed by the cholinesterase. It is also used topically or orally. In topically, we use for the treatment of glaucoma, orally for xerostomia. Xerostomia, that is dryness of the mouth. We use this pilocarpine. So muscarine, the source of muscarine is the mushrooms, and the indications of muscarine, no current medical use, and nicotine can be used as dermal patches in smoking cessation programs. Pilocarpine is the source of pilocarpine is Pilocarpus or Pilocarpus jaborendi or Pilocarpus, which is a shrub, and it is used in the treatment of open angle glaucoma. So that is the simple glaucoma, open angle glaucoma. It is not used in closed angle glaucoma because in closed angle glaucoma, the first treatment of choice is iridectomy followed by other management. When you look at the pharmacological responses to the interaction of cholinergic agonist with muscarinic receptors, especially when we talk about the actions of pharmacological actions of this cholinomimetic agonist with respect to the muscarinic receptors, especially we talk about the actions of acetylcholine or pharmacological actions of acetylcholine. So when you talk about these muscarinic actions which resemble to the actions of the alkaloid, the muscarine, which is found in some form of mushrooms, and these actions result from the stimulation of the muscarinic receptors by acetylcholine. So if you look at the various actions of acetylcholine on the cardiovascular system, especially on the heart. On the heart, the actions of acetylcholine are similar to that of vagal stimulation. So it depresses the SA node, that is sinoatrial node, and thereby it reduces the heart rate, it reduces the force of contraction, and in larger doses, it can also cause atrioventricular conduction, which is depressed and may result in partial to total AV block due to excessive or by giving larger doses of acetylcholine. So that means to say on the heart, acetylcholine has actions through the stimulation of vagus, depressing the SA node and thereby reducing the heart rate. It reduces the force of contraction. Not only that, when it is used in larger doses, it may cause the depression of the AV conduction, may result in the partial or total AV nodal block. Okay, then the actions of acetylcholine on the blood vessels. On the blood vessels, acetylcholine relaxes the vascular smooth muscles and it dilates the blood vessels of almost all the vascular beds, including the pulmonary vascular bed, the coronary vessels, and also the skin, causing flushing and the mucous membrane. So it causes vasodilatation of all these things, causing cutaneous flushing. It causes there's a flushing of the mucous membranes, and finally, it may result in the fall of blood pressure due to a fall in the total peripheral vascular resistance. And the vasodilator effect of acetylcholine is mediated by the stimulation of endothelial derived relaxing factor with the production of nitric oxide. And this vasodilatation may also be due to an indirect effect by inhibition of noradrenaline released from the adrenergic nerve endings by acetylcholine. So the vasodilatation effect is mediated by two mechanisms. One is by the production of nitric oxide through the stimulation of endothelial derived relaxing factor, number one. The vasodilatation may also be due to an indirect effect by inhibition of the noradrenaline release from the adrenergic nerve endings by acetylcholine. So two mechanisms of vasodilatation, especially in the blood vessels. Now, this is the mechanism, as I told you, the second mechanism. Acetylcholine acts through M3 stimulation in the endothelial cells, which converts L-arginine to nitric oxide in the presence of nitric oxide synthase. And this nitric oxide which is formed is released in the endothelium. This nitric oxide, again, it combines with the G protein through a G protein coupled receptor through guanylate cyclate, which converts the GTP. It converts the GTP to cyclic GMP. Guanosine triphosphate is converted to cyclic guanosine monophosphate, and this increased cyclic GMP will cause the smooth muscles to get relaxed. So this is a second mechanism. The first mechanism, as what I told you, was this is the first mechanism to the release of nitric oxide. The second mechanism is of vasodilation or muscle relaxation or vasodilatation is due to an indirect effect by inhibition of non-adrenal release from the adrenergic nerve endings by the acetylcholine. Now, the effect of the acetylcholine and the gastrointestinal tract. So on the gastrointestinal tract, what happens on the gastrointestinal tract? Acetylcholine in the smooth muscles of the gastrointestinal tract increases the tone of all the smooth muscles, okay, especially in the GIT. It causes the stimulation of the GIT smooth muscle, thereby increasing the tone and motility, and in large doses of these cholinergic drugs will cause spasm and tenesmus. In large doses, it is causing spasm and tenesmus. That means to say, on the gastrointestinal tract, the tone and peristalsis is increased, the sphincters are relaxed, resulting in rapid forward propulsions of the gastrointestinal contents. Okay, then the acetylcholine effects on the urinary tract, they contract the detrusor muscle of the bladder, that is the cholinesters and the pilocarpine. They increase the voiding pressure, they decrease the bladder capacity and increase the ureteral peristalsis. The trigone and the external sphincter muscles relax. Okay, that means to say, urinary bladder, the detrusor muscle contracts and the trigone sphincter relaxes, promoting the voiding of the urine. Okay. Then in animals with experimental spinal cord lesions, muscarinic agonists promote evacuation of the bladder. Then coming to the effects of on the bronchial smooth muscle, we have to discuss the effects on the bronchial smooth muscle also. The acetylcholine contracts the bronchial smooth muscle, resulting in bronchospasm. Hence, if you look at in the management of bronchial asthma, we have muscarinic receptor antagonists like ipratropium bromide or thiotropium bromide. That ipratropium bromide and thiotropium bromide are the anti-muscarinic drugs which are used in the treatment of bronchial asthma, because the acetylcholine effect on the bronchial smooth muscle is contraction, resulting in bronchospasm. On the what you call like the exocrine glands, on the exocrine glands, generally what happens is, on the exocrine glands, there is a stimulation of secretion of the exocrine glands, resulting in increased salivation. It also increases the lacrimal fluid, increases the stimulation of the lacrimal ducts, resulting in increased lacrimation. The gastric secretions are increased. The pancreatic, the intestinal glands, and the mucosal cells of the respiratory tract also increase the secretions. So when you look into the side effects of these cholinergic drugs, the stimulation of acetylcholine, it is mainly the hiccups, the excessive salivation, nausea, vomiting, weakness, and occasionally cardiovascular collapse. And not only that, on the central nervous system, if you look at on the central nervous system, it is mainly characterized or characteristic cortical, that is cerebral cortical arousal or activation response in the cats is seen, especially in the central nervous system. And The acetylcholine being a quaternary compound, the choline esters do not cross the blood-brain barrier. So the respiratory system, as I already told you, it causes trachobronchial secretions, increased secretions. The bronchial smooth molecule is stimulated by the muscarinic receptor agonist, and in asthmatic patients, the response they respond with intense bronchoconstriction, with added superadded secretions and a reduction in the vital capacity. And on the eye, if you look at the effects on the eye, the cholinergic stimulations bring about the constriction of the pupils. That is the miosis. By contracting the circular muscles of the iris, the stimulation of the muscarinic receptors through M3 stimulation, which presents in the sphincter pupillae, results in miosis. And the drainage of the aqueous humor is facilitated and intraocular pressure falls. Not only that, the ciliary muscle contracts, resulting in spasm of accommodation. So all these are seen, especially the effects of on the eye due to muscarinic receptor stimulation, which is mainly through the M3 receptors. So if you look at this particular innervation of the iris, so when you talk about the innervation of the iris, there is a dual innervation which is present in the iris. So if you look at this, the brain through the ciliary ganglion and through the superior cervical ganglion, through the superior cervical ganglion, there is a sympathetic innervation, that is the adrenergic nerve. Through the adrenergic nerve stimulation, so it is causing the pupillary dilatation, that is the mydriasis. So this is the normal pupil, right? This is the normal pupil. When there's adrenergic nerve stimulation occurs through the superior cervical ganglia, there is a dilatation of the pupil. When there is a parasympathetic stimulation through the ciliary ganglion, it causes the constriction of the pupil. So we have this iris has dual innervation. Okay, so the sympathetic innervation is through the long ciliary nerve with the release of noradrenaline, which causes the mydriasis or pupillary dilatation. And through the short ciliary nerve, it is the parasympathetic innervation. Through the ciliary ganglion, release of acetylcholine, it is causing miosis. Okay, I am sorry. Yeah, this is a normal eye actually. This is a normal eye, right? Now, when you see meiosis, so in meiosis, what happens? There is a contraction of the sphincter pupillae. That is a muscarinic agonist they cause, and anticholinergics also cause contraction of the sphincter pupillae and relaxation of the dilator pupillae through alpha-1 adrenergic agonists like the adrenergic neuron blockers, resulting in meiosis, right? So this is meiosis, as we already discussed, right? Normal eye, meiosis. Normal eye, mydriasis. So here mydriasis mainly is due to contraction of the radial muscle through the alpha agonist and relaxation of the circular muscle. That is mydriasis. Now, what is the clinical significance of this M1 type of muscarinic cholinergic or acetylcholine receptors, which play a very important role in the cognitive processing, which is nothing but a disease which is called as Alzheimer's disease. So if you look at this Alzheimer's disease, in the Alzheimer's disease, what happens is the progressive loss of memory. So this progressive loss of memory can be tackled by intervening with M1 type of muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. And these agents, which are called as neurotropic agents, they decrease the amyloid deposits. Generally, there is a increased deposition of amyloid and also the tau bodies. Okay, so whenever there's an increased amyloid deposition in the cortex, cerebral cortex, there's a progressive dementia, or there's a progressive memory loss. So these agents, which reduce the amyloid deposits and improve the damage due to oxidative stress, especially of the tau proteins, which the tau proteins, they cause phosphorylation, resulting in Alzheimer's disease is decreased and the cholinergic function is enhanced. Hence, several agents of the what you call like the muscarinic agents or muscarinic receptor agonist or muscarinic acetylcholine receptors agonist, they play a very important role, which has to be focused, especially in the treatment of what you call like the Alzheimer's disease. So generally we have this rivastigmine, then we have galantamine and all those things, which can be used for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Now, the agent Janomelin has been proposed as a potential treatment of schizophrenia. So Janomelin for schizophrenia, and in the form of pilocarpine, which is a muscarinic receptor agonist, have been used medically for a long time, especially in the treatment of glaucoma. When I talk about M3 receptor agonists like aceclidine for glaucoma, ericolin, which is an alkaloid present in the betel nut, and pilocarpine, which is a drug that acts as a muscarinic receptor agonist, which is used for the treatment of open angle glaucoma or uncomplicated glaucoma. Then we have cevimeline, which is a muscarinic receptor agonist, that is an FDA approved drug and used for the management of dry mouth, especially in Sjogren's syndrome, right? And when talking about acetylcholine, we have seen the various effects of acetylcholine, the pharmacological actions of acetylcholine on the cardiovascular system, especially the heart, the blood vessels, the smooth muscles of the GIT, the urinary bladder, the bronchial smooth muscles. Then on the secretions, especially on the glands, especially secretion, there is an increase on the eye. And of course, the nicotinic actions we'll discuss a bit later. So if I talk about this acetylcholine, which is rarely given for therapeutic uses, but because it has a very shorter duration of action, which is rapidly metabolized or hydrolyzed in the body, the millionth of a second. So that is why acetylcholine does not have any therapeutic use. But on the other hand, if acetylcholine is used intravenously, a small dose of acetylcholine will produce a transient fall in the blood pressure owing to a generalized vasodilatation, usually accompanied by reflex tachycardia. So as you know that it is metabolized by acetylcholinesterase or true cholinesterase enzyme, and has functions both in the peripheral nervous system as well as in the central nervous system as a neuromodulator. Especially if you talk with respect to the peripheral nervous system, acetylcholine activates the muscle, that is the skeletal muscles, through the nicotinic receptors and is a major neurotransmitter, especially in the autonomic nervous system. And in the CNS, acetylcholine and the associated neurons form a neurotransmitter system, the cholinergic system, which tends to cause excitatory actions, especially in the central nervous system. When I talk about the cholinomimetic drugs, other cholinomimetic drugs like carbachol, bethanechol, methacholine, and acetylcholine. When you talk about carbachol, it is a potent agonist which is used in the treatment of glaucoma, which causes miosis. But the major side effect of carbachol is corneal edema and decreased vision, that is why it is having a lot of limitations in the treatment of glaucoma. So we have better drugs available for the treatment of glaucoma. We are not using carbachol because of its corneal edema and decreased vision. Then we talk about bethanechol. It is actually a cholinomimetic drug which is used orally, and it is effective also by using through the subcutaneous route, and it is mainly used for the treatment or relief of post-surgical urinary retention and abdominal distension. This particular drug has very less toxicity and should be used with caution, especially in asthmatic patients, because cholinergic agonists, they cause bronchospasm. There's a increased secretion in the bronchia or the respiratory system or the respiratory tract. Added to that, there is a bronchospasm. So all the cholinomimetic drugs have to be used with caution, especially in patients with bronchial asthma. Apart from that, if I talk about methacholine, it is available as methacholine chloride, may be administered for the diagnosis of bronchial hyperactivity. And apart from that, pilocarpine, it is a very important cholinomimetic alkaloid. It is called as a cholinomimetic ester of alkaloid group, that is pilocarpine. So this pilocarpine, it is a very important drug, which is a natural product obtained from the plant, Pilocarpus jaborandi. And it is also available as an occult delivery system. It is available as a gel. It is available in the form of a tablet, and also available in the form of what you call like the ophthalmic solution. The systemic effects include the copious sweating, salivation, and increased gastric secretion. It is used in the treatment of glaucoma and xerostomia. In xerostomia, we give pilocarp in the form of a tablet, but in glaucoma, it can be used as an occult, or it can be used as a gel or an ophthalmic solution. And generally, all these drugs are metabolized by cholinesterase enzyme, that is acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So when you talk about other drugs like physostigmine, pyridostigmine, and all these things, they are called as anticholinesterase drugs. They are especially the anticholinesterase drugs or indirectly acting cholinomimetic drugs that I will be discussing in my next class. It is the indirectly acting cholinesterases or anticholinesterases I'll be discussing in the next class. So when you talk about the latest muscarinic agonists, they are of current research interest is focused on developing the agents with selective affinity for the muscarinic receptors in the brain, especially potentially useful in the treatment of Alzheimer's disease and other cognitive disorders like ericoline, xanomeline, oxytrimorin, rivastigmine, galantamine, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this, what is this aceclidine? So what is this aceclidine? So this aceclidine, it is available in the names of glucostat, gluconorm, glodin, which is a parasympathomimetic meiotic agent used in the treatment of narrow angle glaucoma. It decreases the intraocular pressure. Okay, not only that, when you talk about mechanism of action, it primarily acts on the muscarinic receptors, and the adverse effects are increased salivation. It may cause bradycardia in large doses. Ericolin, it is an alkaloid, a natural product found in the erica nut, the fruit of erica palm, that is Erica catechu. So ericolin is known to be a partial agonist of the muscarinic acetylcholine M1, M2, and M3 receptors, which is believed to be the primary cause of its parasympathetic effect, and such as pupillary constriction and bronchoconstriction may occur with this. So it is also used as a meiotic. Not only that, ericolin was suggested as a treatment of Alzheimer's disease, as it shows verbal and spatial memory improvement in patients with Alzheimer's, and ericolin is administered through intravenous route. It has also been used medicinally as an antihelminthic, which is a drug against the parasitic worms. So ericolin is used as an antihelminthic also, but it is not used as a first choice due to its carcinogenic properties. Then we have another drug which is called as cevimeline. This is an cholinomimetic drug, parasympathomimetic, also having a muscarinic agonist action with partial effect on the M3 receptors, which is used in the treatment of dry mouth associated with Sjogren's syndrome. And the mechanism of action is by activating the M3 receptor of the parasympathetic nervous system. Cevimeline stimulates the secretion by the salivary glands, thereby alleviating the dry mouth which is seen in the Sjogren's syndrome. And also, when you talk about the side effects, they include the nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, excessive sweatings. Sometimes it may result in development of a rash, headache, running nose, flu-like syndrome, cough, drowsiness, hot flushes, blurred vision, and difficulty in sleeping. These are all the various common side effects associated with what you call like the cevimeline. Then we have another drug which is called as janomeline. Janomeline is a muscarinic receptor agonist with reasonable selectivity for M1 and M4 subtype of muscarinic receptors. So this M1 and M4 type, especially when I talk about M1, it is the central nervous system, central nervous system. It has been studied for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease and schizophrenia, although the gastrointestinal side effects lead to a high drop rate in the clinical trials. And despite this, janomeline is found robust improvements in verbal learning and short-term memory, associated problems in especially treatment of what you call like the Alzheimer's disease. Then we have another drug which is called as Vidaclidin. So it is a novel analgesic drug which acts as a mixed agonist and antagonist at muscarinic acetylcholine receptors, and it is being a potent and selective agonist for M1 receptor and M4 subtype of receptors, and yet an antagonist at M2, M3, and M5 subtypes of receptors of the muscarinic type. So this Vidaclidin, it is orally active and effective analgesic over 3 times than the potency of morphine, thrice the potency of morphine, with side effects such as salivation and tremor. And the human clinical trial showed little potential for the development of dependence or abuse, and research is being done in its possible clinical application in the treatment of neuropathic pain and cancer pain relief, because it is said to be having 3 times more potent in when compared to that of morphine. So what is that? That is Vidaclidin. Then we talk about muscarine. So muscarine is having L type of muscarine or muscarine, which is a natural product found in certain mushrooms such as the deadly Amanita muscaria and deal bata, C deal bata. It was the first parasympathomimetic substance ever studied and causes profound activation of the peripheral parasympathetic nervous system that may end in convulsions, may result in convulsions and even death. Being a quaternary amine compound, muscarine is less completely absorbed from the GIT than the tertiary amines, but it does cross the blood-brain barrier. So this muscarine is the only a parasympathomimetic drug or parasympathomimetic amine which is having less completely absorbed from the GIT than the tertiary amines, but it can cross the blood-brain barrier. And muscarine poisoning is characterized by increased salivation. Then yes, it is characterized by increased salivation, sweating, perspiration, lacrimation within 15 to 30 minutes after the ingestion. And with large doses, these symptoms may be followed by abdominal pain, severe nausea, diarrhea, blood vision, and labored breathing. Okay, so muscarine poisoning. Then, of course, there is something which is called as mushroom poisoning. So, in mushroom poisoning, can be classified into 3 types. Mushroom poisoning can be classified into 3 types, like early onset mushroom poisoning, hallucinogen, and late onset. So mushroom poisoning early onset is caused by inocybe and related species. So yeah, inocybe and related species, and the symptoms of poisoning appear within 30 to 60 minutes of mushroom ingestion and resemble the muscarinic stimulation, that is increased salivation, nausea, vomiting, bronchospasm, and then we have abdominal colic, diarrhea, bradycardia, and hypotension. And these symptoms respond to atropine. So this muscarine or mushroom poisoning, early onset mushroom poisoning, the antagonist or the treatment of early onset mushroom poisoning is muscarinic receptor antagonist, that is atropine, which can be given 1 to 2 milligrams intramuscularly every 30 minutes. Then apart from that, we have hallucinogenic effect of mushroom poisoning, the second stage, which may be due to Amanita muscaria. So there's a mushroom which is called as Amanita muscaria, or Amanita muscaria will cause hallucinogen effect. So and Amanita muscaria related species may cause hallucinogen effect, which is presented as restlessness, hallucinations, ataxia, delirium. All the symptoms like atropine poisoning. It does not have any specific antidote. The treatment is supportive, and atropine is contraindicated in Amanita muscaria poisoning. Okay, atropine, early onset atropine, early onset mushroom poisoning, we can give 1 to 2 milligrams of atropine every 30 minutes. But when it is presented with typically Amanita muscaria mushroom poisoning, which is resulted involvement of the CNS, restlessness, hallucinogens, ataxia, delirium, where atropine is contraindicated. Now, the late onset mushroom poisoning, which is due to again another mushroom called as Amanita phalloides, and it is a most serious type of mushroom poisoning due to Amanita phalloides, and can be fatal. Symptoms develop after several hours, and because of cell death in the liver, kidney, and GIT mucosa, may result in fatality. And this can be treated by thiotic acid or penicillin. So late onset, what you call like mushroom poisoning. So intoxication generally subsides within 2 hours, but death is very rare. But late onset and hallucinogen, they don't have proper management, type of mushroom poisoning. So here, intoxication by muscarine subsides within 2 hours. Death is very rare, but may result from cardiac or respiratory failure in severe cases. The specific antidote for early onset muscarine or mushroom poisoning is atropine, 1 to 2 milligrams, given either IM or IV every 30 minutes. So this is regarding the cholinomimetic drugs. Okay, then my next class will be what is called as the anticholinesterases or indirectly acting cholinergic drugs. Thank you.